Cheers,
Cheers.
Josh. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I'm excited to have you here. You are somebody that I've been calling on as your sales rep and now your friend for almost 3 years. You were one of the first accounts that Scott Stewart took me into when I started at Chambers and Chambers. And it was my first time in Flatiron ever, having lived here since 2018. I was always working 2 jobs, but I would always hear people talking about like, oh, I got in the tasting group at Flatiron. What's this Flatiron place everybody talks about? And then when I went with Scott, I was like, holy shit. And he's like, and then around that corner, and I was like, whoa, the shop is huge. And
Couple
that's,
bottles.
yeah, there's a few things laying around. And it was just really cool to see, like, well, I don't know why I waited so long to go in. I mean, we weren't, it was like I said, I was working a ton. And then when I was working at Boulevard, I mean, I was just drinking the wine at Boulevard half the time, whatever was open or...
It's good wine, Boulevard.
There's some cool wines. Yeah. John does a good job.
A little bit of roasting.
A little bit. Yeah. Every now and then. But yeah, anyways, so ever since, I mean, I've been completely enamored with like the reach and the depth of the program at Flatiron. And I've always appreciated your palate, and I'm excited to have you here and talk to you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
As we were just discussing, I mean, I think usually the best way to start off the podcast is to kind of tell people, your background, how wine found you or you found wine, and then kind of like, take us up to today.
Yeah. I don't know. My father, grandfather, and uncle were always kind of into wine, not like super, super deep, but like into it. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of around me. And then after college, I moved to New York, and I had a really, really good friend from growing up. I was actually living with her sister in a big apartment or not big, it's an apartment in New York, but an apartment in New York. And she was working at Christie's auction. And she would be like, oh, you should come by. And in the back of the auctions, they'd have all these like crazy bottles. Have old bottles of like Chateau de Cam Y, so the dry white. Mm-hmm. And they had old first growth Bordeaux and a bunch of stuff that I had no clue what it was, but now would go nuts for. So then I started drinking, like, wow, tasting those, and like we had this thing, like she would like kind of like wink at me, and then I'd bid if it was like super low price.
Right.
And so I started drinking wine that way, and we'd split the lots, and I'd study with her a little bit. And then in 2007, I decided that I was going to move back to Ohio, which is where I'm from. Mm. And I started interviewing at a bunch of places, and I got to the last round, one after 10 rounds of interviews, one after 7 rounds, and both of them had offered me a job. I was doing data analysis at the time. And then they pulled it back because they started laying people off in 2008.
Yeah.
And one day when the second place was pulled back their offer, I got a little bit drunk on whiskey and went on BizBuy and found a wine store right around the corner from where I was living and kind of decided to buy it.
Wow. Buy the wine store.
Buy the wine store.
Holy shit.
I mean, this is Ohio, so it's not that expensive.
Right. Yeah.
And
a little less expensive than Flatiron.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, a fraction. So I bought the wine store, and it's on High Street. At the time, it was this little franchise called Vino 100. Got out of the franchise and started Wine on High. Wow. So it was a tiny little wine store with a wine bar. That's in the middle of Columbus, Ohio.
That's sick. That's great. That's a good way.
Yeah.
And then back to New York?
And then, so I bought that in 2008. It became official. Started working on it at the end of 2007. And then 2013, decided to move back to New York. And I was working on a couple business plans. And as I was doing that, I just started working in a wine store in Dumbo part-time, just for something to do as I was working on these business plans. And my wife has a corporate job, and the corporate job took her to New York. So then I got to know my now partners because they owned that wine store.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if that was that store.
Yeah. So they own Flatiron, or their wives technically own Flatiron because of licensing. And each of them, Josh Cohen and Jeff Patton, owned Uva and Blanc and Rouge in New York.
Oh, is that why they couldn't own Flatiron?
Correct.
So what's that look like? I mean, you can't own an on-premise and off-premise at the same time.
No. You can hold one liquor license.
Oh my fucking God. Seriously?
So that's why in New York you have all these like big, amazing stores.
Yeah.
Because the only way to grow is within your four walls.
Wow. I mean, it's cool because, I always see these guys. There's a couple guys that I follow on Instagram, like, Super Vino Bros, and they're based out of New York. And they're always going to all these like really cool little wine shops, and the wine selection's sick. And it's just like, that's so awesome. There's just all these like little small shops full of really cool wine. And that's funny because I never really put two and two together of like, it's not like a K&L that can buy a bunch of locations, or, not that they have a lot of locations, no shade on K&L, but like, it's not like Bevmo or Total Wine or something like that.
In fact, if you're the CEO of Whole Foods,
okay,
you have to hold the liquor license for the one Whole Foods in New York that can have alcohol.
Whoa.
And Trader Joe's, every grocery store, there can only be one store in the whole state with alcohol.
I kind of like it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no grocery stores that have alcohol.
Yeah.
Wow. And it kind of leads to a more curated selection.
Yeah, and a diverse group of like proprietors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's super cool.
But it's not necessarily the most consumer friendly because
sure. Well, then as a
there are lots of people who just want to grab their bottle of Whispering Angel at the grocery store.
yeah. Well, I mean, we saw it, in Texas. I mean, and also to Oregon, where we went recently, is like, you go to some of these places and you can't buy liquor in the grocery stores. You can't buy. You can only buy wine. You can only buy wine until midnight or whatever the laws. I can't buy wine until after 11 on Sunday or whatever. So it's interesting to see all the laws of all the different states and how they operate. But yeah, that's the first time I've ever heard of that. So
no, it's crazy. In Ohio, there's something called state minimum markups.
Okay.
And bottle 1 is the same price as bottle 9,000 from a supplier.
From the wholesale channel?
From the wholesale channel.
Wow.
So, but they charge a broken case fee of like $1.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense for super cheap wine, and then you have to mark it up 50%.
I mean, it's kind of like high tide rises all ships. So like, I guess I can see it, but then you're dealing with the online aspect.
It turns out if people want to buy a bunch of Veuve Clicquot for their holiday party, they'll either drive to Indiana, or Pennsylvania, or Kentucky.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Or I guess if you're in Toledo, you go to Michigan, but
right.
I don't see any reason to ever go to Michigan.
Unless you're going to wine country. They're doing some wine there now.
Yeah, no, I know.
I had some.
As a Buckeye fan, I have to say that.
Yeah, right. And so you went from what came of Wine on High?
I sold it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you sold it in your move back to New York?
I sold it before I moved back to New York, and It's still a functioning wine store and wine bar. It's more of a wine bar now. It's kind of in the entertainment district, if you will.
You go back and visit when you go see your family?
It's about an hour. Columbus is about an hour and a half from where my parents live.
Okay.
So I've been back a few times, but not a ton.
That's cool. Yeah. Does it still feel?
And there's still people that I hired or that worked for me that are still working there.
That's awesome.
Which
I love that.
is super, super cool.
You don't see that much anymore, so that's good to hear. So then Flatiron in New York, you were in New York. You were kind of bouncing around a couple different business ideas. Were you part of the team in the New York location as well?
I worked mostly at Blanc and Rouge.
Okay.
A little bit of Flatiron, but not very much at all, just little help here and there. And then ultimately, we were in New York, and my wife is from Palo Alto, and her company asked her if she wanted to transfer out to San Francisco. And my wife is like, you're working on business ideas, but nothing has come to fruition.
Right.
Fully.
Yeah.
And I want to get back home. So how about we take this move as it's available to us and come back to California.
And then rolled right into opening a second location.
So, and then I started looking at locations for me to open in San Francisco. And I talked to Josh and told him what I was doing, Josh Cohen, and told him what I was doing. And he was like, we're doing the exact same thing. We've already started looking at locations. How about we just team up?
God, that's great. That's perfect. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you look for in a situation like that, right? What was in the, having only been in San Francisco since 2018, I haven't really seen a lot of like people say, oh, this was in that space before, this one was in that space before, but you're coming up on, it's almost 10 years at Flatiron SF.
2016. So,
2016, right.
8 years. It'll be 9 years in February.
And what was the shop like? Was it always that same square footage, or did you gain walls and knock out walls, or?
It was the same square footage.
It's huge.
But it was this apparent. So the Palace Hotel, which is where we're located.
Oh, right.
Is owned by a Japanese company. And they wanted a good Japanese restaurant in San Francisco, which apparently in the 90s wasn't available. So they brought over a chef and opened up this restaurant called Kyoya, and apparently I've obviously had never been, but apparently it was the best Japanese restaurant in San Francisco for a long time. But it's a union hotel, and if they wanted to put another restaurant in, then it had to be union. And the economics just weren't working for Kyoya anymore. I think a lot more Japanese restaurants came to town, and it's hard to run a union restaurant.
Yeah.
So it was built out as a restaurant, and the union said that if another restaurant opened, it had to be a union restaurant.
So they were like, well, open a retailer.
So multiple restaurants looked at it, and they're
Yeah,
like, we just can't make this
yeah,
work.
yeah, right.
The economics aren't there. But it's a really big space, so there are very few retailers other than chain retail, which they didn't want to go into that space. So it was empty for a couple of years. We came along, and the Yelp World headquarters was right next door.
Oh, yeah.
So, and it was the busiest street in San Francisco at the time. So we were like, this is great. This is perfect. We worked out a lease and had to completely tear out a commercial kitchen. And
no small feat.
Yeah. And also seemed like the complete antithesis of everything that was going on at that time.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, I had to level floors and do the whole nine. Take it down to the studs, and then we built it out so that it's the thought was we wanted it to be kind of like a library with a bunch of different little rooms.
Yeah.
So that it was less overwhelming to look at 4,000 bottles of wine. So it was kind of, each room felt like its own little store.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because it does very much feel like that. Everything feels very kind of like tidy.
Yeah.
And it feels like you can take it a bite at a time. And I know, like, I came in recently before Thanksgiving and I grabbed a bottle of Beaujolais, and I knew exactly where I was going, right?
Yeah.
I was going to the French room, and then everything's kind of segmented really well, and it feels very like user-friendly for, even as a newcomer to the shop back then, I was just like, okay, this is very clearly laid out. Italians are here, Spanish is here, and it was very, very nice. But yeah, for a wine newcomer, it would be incredibly intimidating to walk in and just look at like 4,000 labels on a shelf. You're like, I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And also what a pain in the ass to say, like, where do you draw the line in the sand of saying, like, we can only have this many facings of Spanish or this many facings of Portuguese, right?
Yeah. I mean, but the store is laid out in a manner that's now the case.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The good news is if someone wants Pinot de Nice, we're probably the only store that has 5.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Or I honestly don't know if the 5 is the actual number.
For better or worse.
Yeah, it could be 4, it could be 8. I honestly don't know off the top of my head what we have, but
that's funny.
so we have a lot of like wine people like yourself and other industry people that love coming, that are taking an exam, and they're like, I really need to dig down on this grape.
Yeah.
And
I need this incredibly esoteric thing that you have.
We've got every expression of it.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, when let's see, it was the year 2021. We did maybe it was 22. Whatever, it was New Year's Day at one point, and I got together with a bunch of my friends, and we did Beaujolais Day. And we're like, we need all 10 crews of Beaujolais, right? And we're like, oh, this is going to be so hard. This is going to be so hard. And it was like, between you guys and K&L, we found everything.
Yeah.
We're like, that was easy. That made our lives so much simpler, you know? And my friend even found like Beaujolais Blanc, and we were like, this is really cool, you know? And we kind of dug into it. We weren't, you know, dissecting like the natural and the non-natural producers. We weren't looking to capture, you know, a single vintage or anything like that. We're just like, it's New Year's Day, we're all going to be hungover. Let's order pizza and drink Beaujolais, right? But your selection was, at the time, was already great. Now I think you have all 10 crews. I think when I looked in there recently.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
But we work with a lot of small producers, and things come in and out. So
yeah.
But yeah, we should generally have all 10 crews.
Yeah. Which is.
And we have Beaujolais Blanc.
Yeah.
Bouillon Beaujolais Blanc is delicious and cheap.
Oh, I don't think I've had
great.
that. I've only had Beaujolais Blanc, I think 2 or 3 times now, but that's the thing. Every time I come in there, I'm like, well, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I got Bonnet Coton.
Yeah,
that was the Beaujolais that I got.
Okay, great.
Very natural, but like really good, really well made. It was perfect for Thanksgiving. Yeah. You know, we opened it up with some 21, other stuff.
So this was 19. 19 was a great vintage.
No, I'm sorry. This was this year for Thanksgiving.
Oh, this
I just
year
came in and grabbed the bottle a couple weeks ago.
So 22s are also great.
Yeah, it was great. It was so good.
It can be a little variable sometimes.
Yeah. And, you know, for the price, that's another thing is you're getting like pretty specific wines, and, you know, wines from some of these regions and some of these smaller producers aren't garnering the price tags that others are, right? It's not like we're drinking, you know, Foyard 3.14 or anything like that, you know?
But also Foyard, like if you think about it, like it's one of the most expensive Beaujolais.
Yeah. At $50.
Yeah, but it's still Bourgogne Blanc or Bourgogne Rouge. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
These days.
It is. That's true. Yeah, it's that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about was like how have you seen, I mean, I'm sure that like, you know, the wine scene in Columbus, Ohio was like nothing to snuff at. You know, you weren't carrying like regular old grocery store wines. I'm sure you had a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And especially, you know, with your history at and access to things at Christie's. But
I think the Christie's piece just made me think that I knew a little bit about wine.
Sure.
And then realized that I knew nothing.
Yeah, nobody really knows anything. We all think we know some, and we probably know a little, but nobody knows everything.
No, but I really knew like nothing.
Right.
The time. I was like,
I drink the top 1% wines. I know everything. And, you know, how was the transition, I guess, going from New York to San Francisco? I mean, both are kind of like burgeoning wine industries in a sense already, but I'm sure it's quite different as far as like access and everything like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think access is probably pretty similar.
Okay.
You know, you'll have a little bit more of one thing than another, and something will be distributed by one importer in New York and one importer in San Francisco. So there's differences there, and, you know, relationships are different. But the access isn't the main difference. I would say the main difference is in New York, people are much more direct. Whether they have less time or not, they feel as though they have less time. And they tend to have FOMO.
Yeah.
So like if there's a new producer that seems like or not a new producer, but an up and coming producer that seems to be hot, New York sells out of it right away.
Yeah.
And San Francisco, they're like, we'll see.
Yeah.
So it's a little less like FOMO-y. And then also you just have, you know, we're so close to Napa and Sonoma, and they're much closer to Europe. So in 6 hours they can be in France. So when they vacation, they go to France.
Holy shit! Is it only 6 hours? Yeah. Wow.
They go to France. They go to Germany. They go to Italy.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy.
God, 6 hours. That's nothing.
Maybe 7.
Well, either way, whatever. It's what, 10 and a half, 11 from us to get to Barcelona?
Yeah.
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 And it's what, 5.5 hours of airtime to get to New York.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's but yeah, so they vacation there and they get to know the wines, which is why like Riesling
Right.
sells so much better in New York than here because
They get to go to Germany.
people go to Germany on vacation.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's like flying 12 hours to go to Germany.
Yeah. It's like a once in a lifetime thing or once a decade kind of thing versus like not that it's like you can't go every summer, but you could go every couple years or something like that.
Yeah, versus just looking and being like, especially in your 20s,
Yeah.
seeing a ticket for $250 or $300 and just shooting over.
Great.
Which I did.
It's probably why we sell so much tequila and mezcal here is,
exactly. Mexico.
very close to Mexico. And how much...
The tequila in Tijuana is amazing.
Yeah. And how much of a change have you seen just in the almost 10 years here in San Francisco as far as like consumer palate? I mean, when you got here, there was already like great established wine shops, right? So it's not like you were the new kids on the block, like pushing the envelope necessarily. I mean, I'm sure that you were pushing the envelope in a lot of ways, especially with probably a more vast knowledge and understanding of all the European wines that you had a little bit more exposure to in New York. But I mean, we've all kind of seen like the rise and fall of rosé just in the last decade and kind of seen the short spike of orange wine that's kind of seems like it's tapered off. I mean,
yeah, I think it's more of a weeding out.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that I think that New York and San Francisco kind of are very similar. They're both coastal, so we both, like I said, we have access to both.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest trends that I'm seeing now, there's always that hot wine or group of wine, right? It was Shiraz for a while, and then it was Malbec, and then it was rosé, and then orange wine, and then as they gain popularity, the prices go up, and people are like, well, this was great for $15.
Yeah,
but
accessibility drops. Yeah.
And they all these brands enter the grocery stores in California, not New York. And they become less cool inherently.
Yeah.
So that's less of, I don't view that as like a huge trend line. I think the trend line was lots and lots of people got really, really into bottles. And then there became these trophy bottles and people chased these trophy bottles. And there's a trend, which is not necessarily a bad thing, of the younger generation taking over a winery and being like, well, the guy next to me makes this amazing wine. I'm going to make an amazing wine.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, whether that be $100 bottle or $200 bottle, these people, everyone's striving to make this $100 bottle.
Benchmark wine.
Yeah, which raises the tide in general, but kind of leaves this gap of the Tuesday bottle that is really good, but still affordable.
That's a good point. That's something that Bianca and I were talking about this. We were driving around on, I don't know, Friday or Saturday, and we just kept talking about the same thing. We were like, the industry's in kind of a weird spot. We were talking about just like the cost of entry. You go to the store, you buy a bottle of wine, it's like $25.
Yeah.
And you don't even know if you're going to like it. It feels like a big commitment. Whereas like you can go buy some beers or you could do whatever. But, it feels like more and more like you used to be able to find a bunch of cool wines that retailed at, sub 10 or sub 15 a bottle. And you still can, I guess, but there's a lot less of it, it feels like.
Yeah. When I was in Columbus, we were selling Chateau de Tour and we get cases of it.
Yeah.
And it was like $18 on the shelf. And I remember multiple times opening up a bottle, it would have a little trap CO2, which Chateau de Tour sometimes does, and just like pushing it aside and opening up another bottle.
Yeah.
Because it was that cheap. But there's always those wines, the Chateau de Tour, the Rougeard, all these wines that all of us that look back and we're like, oh man, why did I drink those instead of save them?
Yeah.
But it feels like more and more wine is becoming more and more precious. To your point of the $25 bottle.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, things are just getting more and more costly too. I feel like it's like, corks are not as easy to come by. I'm sure it's more expensive.
Yeah.
Glass is more expensive. And, we haven't quite entered the phase of tariffs and how the tariffs will affect us, maybe directly as wine importers, but also as the dry good market. So I think all of these things kind of remain to be seen. But yeah, I think it's important to, as you said, kind of realize that it's not just necessarily like a full trajectory. It's kind of different, like high spots, and then it grows in popularity and people stop drinking it quite as much because things just it's harder to get. Like I never see, and maybe this is me being stupid, but like if I was going to go out and buy a bottle of wine and try to find Genevat, I'm sure that I wouldn't be able to find it. You know what I mean? Maybe buy it online or something like that. But it's not like you can just walk into your shop and you have like 6 or 7 bottles just laying around probably.
Yeah. No, I mean,
when the release happens.
Once a year.
Yeah.
When the release happens,
Right.
You'll find a few bottles of Genevat on the shelf.
Yeah.
And that's always been like that. And those are, Genevat's a benchmark producer.
Right.
Those have always been the ones that people chase and want, and collectors go crazy after. And, and it's still one of those things where if you don't have a crazy budget, which most of us don't, you can find a couple friends and split a bottle of Genevat and have that experience.
Yeah.
I think there are other regions where that's getting harder and harder to be able to chip in and get that really amazing bottle and that amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, I love my friends, but like, am I gonna chip in and split like a bottle of any Eschazeau?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, is anything
Just
affordable
any
anymore?
You can find a bottle of Eschazeau for like $400. So
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone gets a glass for $100.
Everybody gets it's a $100 glass of wine. Congrats.
It's a home pour though.
Yeah, it's healthy. It's a 25-ounce bottle.
6 ounce pour.
Yeah. What do you think when you think of like things that are happening now? I mean, you were mentioning the kind of not necessarily rise and fall, but kind of the rise of different things. And natural wine is something that I talk about a lot on the podcast. It's something that like I think is deserving of attention and I think is deserving of like praise in a lot of ways also. And something that Bianca and I have been talking about a lot lately too is kind of like drinking with intentionality, and like drinking natural wine is like some people drink natural wine because it's like hip and it's cool, but like at least people give a fuck about like how it's made, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're noticing more attention towards natural wine with people like say walking in the shop and looking for it specifically? And if so, do you feel like that's gonna have staying power, I guess?
I think that natural wine kind of people come in either want it or want to avoid it. And I think it really shed light on kind of proper farming practices and being good citizens and trying to lower carbon emissions and not put a bunch of like shit in your wine that people don't realize is in your wine. But I think it probably will end up phasing itself out in a way. I remember when we opened up the shop, there was this thing led by Jasmine Hirsch and the Pays and, a lot of the far west Sonoma Coast producers called IPOB, In Pursuit of Balance. And I think 4 or 5 years into the store being open, they were like, you know what? Our job is done. The wines are more balanced. The acid to fruit ratio, people aren't picking super, super late anymore. There's a lot of good producers out there. And I think with natural wine, that's starting to happen, right? Like in Bordeaux, the Bordelais are there's Palmer makes biodynamic wine, right?
Right.
If the Bordelais are paying attention, then the consumers have spoken and things are moving in the right direction. So I think the kind of like natural buzzword, which really means nothing.
Right. Yeah.
There is no
very loose term.
Yeah, there is no actual designation of what is natural and what's not natural. I think it's gonna kind of outlive its lifespan, and people are just gonna look at it and be like, we make wine properly, as opposed to people coming in specifically asking for natural wine.
Right. And that's I mean, I feel like that kind of leads me into my next question too, is like, do you feel like that's something when somebody comes in and they haven't drank a lot of wine before, they feel like they're asking a lot of questions, and you're looking at a shelf, and I mean, you guys are obviously well versed in all of your wines and everything that you're carrying, enough to tell them like what's a little lower intervention and what's a little less lower intervention.
Yeah.
Do you feel like
conventional?
More conventional? Thank you.
More 80s, 90s.
Do you feel like that's something that is kind of up to the business to focus on, or up to the business to highlight, I guess, for the consumer? Because if somebody comes in, like, say my mom comes in and, she's like wine shopping. I mean, usually she just sends me a picture of stuff and is like, what should I drink? But if she comes in and,
it's better than FaceTime.
that's it. Well, I mean, sometimes it's FaceTime. No, she doesn't have an iPhone, so it's usually WhatsApp. I WhatsApp called you didn't answer. I go, I have to reinstall it. Hold on.
Sorry.
I only use it for her. I love you, Mom. But do you feel like it's kind of like, up to the proprietor, just like it would be up to like, say, like a SOM, suggesting a wine on a program to like pull as much information out of the consumer as possible? Like, what do you usually like? Oh, I like, XYZ Napa Cab. And it's like, great. Then I'm not going to recommend, something a little less intervention for you or something.
Yeah. I mean, I think the job of anyone who sells anything is to listen to their customer, and give them ultimately what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So as a proprietor of a wine store, it's the exact same thing. If someone comes in and says that I'm looking for this massively oaked, late harvest, whatever thing that I'm not personally into, my job is to give them that bottle and not try and convince them that some super natty Bourgogne is also Cab Franc and delicious.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. I think that's well said. I think, having never worked in the retail side of things, it's a big blind spot for me, and that's why I'm, appreciative to have you on, and to have had on Donald from Arlequin and James from Artisan Wines in the past too. So, wine retail is just such a kind of like a black hole in my knowledge that I have a hard time understanding. And one of the things that when I was speaking with James at Artisan Wines about was, Wine Searcher and how that affects business. And, to him, he said that it's almost better in a way to have it because it kind of holds everybody accountable. I mean, do you kind of feel the same way about things like Wine Searcher?
Yeah. It's made what we do more global, right? If we're trying to sell a bottle for $80 and someone in New York has it for $40, then it's very obvious to the consumer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's our job to go back to the source that we're getting it from and saying, hey, listen, this bottle we can't sell it at this price because it's available here, here, and here.
Right.
So either you need to fix pricing or we can't carry it in California. But I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I very much long for the days of people just coming in and going to the local wine store and just having a nice conversation.
Grabbing a six-pack of wine. Yeah, yeah.
Having a nice conversation, and they get the bottles that they're happy drinking, and no one's squabbling over $2.
Right, yeah. Do you feel like, does that ever happen to you guys? Like, does anybody ever pull up Wine Searcher, like, right in front of you?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have to like bargain with them, or you just say like, hey, that's our price? Like,
Yeah, I mean, generally that's our price.
yeah.
Every once in a while, depending on my mood.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And maybe their approach too,
Yeah.
you know?
But it's also it's a tool for them.
Yeah.
You can't fault someone for saying, "Hey, listen, this bottle is, 20% more. Why is that?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe it's helpful too, because in a way they might be grabbing, say like for somebody that's less knowledgeable in wine, they can come in and they can ask you that question, and you can say, well, that's this bottling versus this bottling, and kind of just stirs up more conversation and adds a little bit more depth to.
Find the less knowledgeable person is a non-wine searcher.
I guess that's a good point. Yeah, wine search is probably mostly a tool for people that are seeking out particular producers, particular wines.
Yeah, people that have a cellar.
Right.
Generally.
Yeah. And
I would say Vivino probably is used a lot more.
That's more of a consumer-based wine. Yeah. I guess, do people use that? Do they come in?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Which is actually, somewhat refreshing, because people are crowdsourcing their wine.
Yeah.
Which is, they can follow their friends, and their friend likes this, which makes a lot more sense to me than trusting someone, 1,000 miles away that you've never met.
Yeah. Some guy sitting in a room writing a review about why this wine is the best wine.
Yeah. You know the other person's taste, and your palate either agrees or disagrees with them. So I think that's a great tool.
I think it's cool. I also have always thought that it's really amazing to be able to like document what you had and what you thought about it. I mean, I have an app called Untapped that's a beer app that I've used for a decade now, and I track every beer I have, and I rate it, and I put where I drank it at and everything like that. And sometimes I go to a bar and I'm looking at the beer and I go like, have I had that beer? And I'll search it and I go, oh yeah, I had it. I didn't like it at all.
Oh, that's cool.
And I go like, okay, I'm going to avoid it, because I think I'm at like, 17,000 different beers. No, it's 1,700 different beers. And so, I kind of get a little lost sometimes. But back in the day when Untapped first came out, there was also another app, and it was called like Uncorked, and it was effectively the same thing. But Vivino, I think, eventually took it over, which is, I think Vivino's user interface is also really fun and friendly, and I think it's good for people. And again, if it's gonna make you talk about wine more and drink more wine, then
Vivino Cellar Tracker.
We use Cellar Tracker. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of good resources and a lot of ways for people to connect over wine, even from afar.
Mm-hmm. Do you we were speaking about, top producers and kind of how people collect different top producers. Is there some things that you think of now as kind of like dark horse wines that you think in the next couple years are going to be kind of exploding, or regions in particular that you think are on the cusp?
I don't know. To me, it's always been like picking the next hot stock.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's tea leaves that you can read. But it's if I would have known, my cellar would have been full of Rougeard and Ravenot and Davisa. Not that Ravenot and Davisa weren't always very well known, but pricing's very different now.
Pricing was so different.
Yeah. I mean, the wine that we're drinking is from Dominique Belluard, who's tragically not with us anymore. But I've thought for a long time that is going to be a wine that's going to be, one of those that just completely takes off, because it's delicious, and a lot of wine professionals are very into it. But you never know. It takes thousands and thousands and thousands of people to all want the same thing for it to really take off.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I don't know. My opinion is drink what you want to drink.
Yeah.
Drink what hits your palate well, and don't chase the next big thing.
Worry about the rest later. Yeah.
If you happen to have it in your cellar, great.
Yeah. I guess that's a good point. I mean, everything that's going into our cellar right now is obviously Riesling, because it's Emery's middle name. But it's also like when we're thinking about like longevity of like what we're aging and what can hang around. And, I mean, potentially gain more value too, is like, could we buy a bunch of, Bordeaux and put it in? Like, sure, but we can't afford that,
Yeah.
I mean, we could, some no-name Bordeaux's probably, but like, aside from that, it's a little hard. Like our biggest purchase ever was, was a 6-pack of Lynch Bage 20, you know, when it was in Wine Spectator's top 100 or top 10 or whatever last year. And we snagged it, and we were just like, this is too much money. Like, we're spending way too much money.
Yeah.
But, you know, also we know that in 5 years or 10 years, we can potentially sell it for a little bit more,
Yeah.
make some money off of it, or, you know.
Bordeaux is a commodity at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
And ebbs and flows. And
Yeah, that's a good point, too. It's not always hot. 20 was a good vintage. And it's, you know, was Spectator top 3 or whatever, or top 5 or whatever. But
yeah, it's
not that that's why we buy it, but
Yeah.
you know, it was also just like, well, if we're gonna invest a little bit into something like that, this is a good thing to invest in. You know.
Yeah. No, speculation's tough. I used to drink Cedric Bouchard all the time. When we were opening up the store, that was like anytime we worked late at night, we'd open up a couple bottles of Cedric Bouchard.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we had a lot of it on the shelf. And Ulysse Collin, same thing. Like, I was always like the Rosé de Saunier for $75. Like, it's expensive, but it's good.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's fun to drink. And, you know, all these things that you used to just drink and not hold precious. Le Dru is one of my all-time favorites. And it's impossible to find her wines now. I wish I had all those bottles that I drank back in my cellar.
Yeah. I guess I haven't gotten there yet. I keep thinking that, like, I'm going to feel that way. But, you know, sometimes I'll pull a cork on something and I'm like, and then I drink it and I'm like, that was great. And I'm always like, I remember having that. But, you know, also we are usually buy, like, you know, 2 bottles of this, 2 bottles of that, 2 bottles of this, right? We're not really buying cases of anything. But there are some times when I'd work with John at Boulevard and, you know, I'd sell through a facing of something and I would just be like, fuck, like, I wish we had a couple more bottles of that. I wish I would have bought one of those bottles or something, you know?
Yeah. For me, it's always the familiarity of that wine and the place that it takes me back to. And, like, for Le Dru, or, like, Le Dru stopped making wine in 2016. If you don't know her, she's out of Ambonnet. And coming up, it was always like, she's going to retire. And then for like 15 years, didn't retire. And everyone was like, yeah, whatever. So we would just drink her wine. And now it's like, I crave that like familiarity of the wine now. But if I want to buy it, it's a $600 bottle or an $800 bottle.
Yeah.
And it's just, and it takes, you know, a massive amount of effort to search it down to pay that amount of money. So that's the, like, I wish I had those bottles in my cellar because I know that I can't get them anymore.
I guess that's the only thing that I have that's somewhat like that I feel that way about is like the Ramey Rogers Creek Syrah.
Yeah.
In 22 or whatever, it got ripped out and they haven't replanted it. And obviously I think like current vintage is 18 or something. There's still a lot of vintages left.
Yeah.
But I'm always in the back of my head, I'm like, I have to remember that vineyard's gone. That vineyard doesn't exist anymore. And I have to kind of like remind myself of like, remember to grab a couple extra of this vintage, you know? So.
Yeah, just so that when you're older and you're reminiscing and you just want to go back and have that like sensory memory.
Yeah,
it's there for you.
Yeah. One of the other things that I want to talk to you about, maybe this is a little bit of a hot take topic, and, you know, obviously I don't think that I'll get in trouble for talking about this, but I guess I kind of want to talk about it anyways, is like, how do you feel about, I'm going to assume how you feel, but I'd love for you to elaborate on how you feel about, you know, some wineries being on-premise only versus, like, off-premise.
I think that the wineries that make their wine have the right to do that, and if that works within their business model, then more power to them.
Cool.
I wish it weren't the case, selfishly.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it will end up biting them because people like having things in their cellars and they like to share things with their friends, and they can't always be at the restaurant with the wine list that has that wine.
Paying 4 times the price.
Paying 4x the price.
Yeah.
To be able to share that wine with them. But ultimately it's not my decision to make.
Yeah. That's nice. I love that. That's much more level-headed. Sometimes I get well, I used to be able to buy this, or, you know, well, I don't know why they wouldn't sell it to me. Or one of my favorites is, I'm just as good as the best somm in San Francisco. And I'm always just like, that's not what the winery wants. Like, the winery is, I mean, for us, on our side of things, the winery is doing 90% of their business DTC.
Yeah.
And we get 10% to put into, top accounts.
And especially out here, when you're dealing with California wineries, the New York store can get as much, or not as much, but they can get all these wineries that we're talking about without a problem. But here, because we're so close, they want them to join their wine club.
Wow, yeah, that's a good point. I guess I didn't realize that. So maybe it's different as far as access wise goes. Because I always felt the opposite. One of my favorite examples that I always use is Raffinelli Winery. It was, a winery that was like very hard to get in Houston. We used to get like 10 cases of Zin a year. And, I came out here and it's like, people were pouring at BTG and you could just get like as much as you want. And then I was like, oh, they make cab. And then, I tried to buy some at Ozumo and they're like, no, you're not going to make cab. And, you go to places like House of Prime Rib and they've buying, 2 cases a week or something. And they're just plowing through it. Or Will, my friend at Prospect, is able to buy kind of as much as he just bought some 2014. Just like offered it to him. I'm like, what the fuck, Yeah, I'm happy for him, but I'm also just like, I wish I could be on that side of it again. Sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, and Raffinelli is super old school, and they do it exactly how they want to do it, and it works for them. So more power to them.
I guess that's a good point. It's just kind of like
it can be super annoying though.
Yeah.
Like I love to be buying Ulysse Colin.
Yeah.
Rosé de Saunier first and selling it for $75 again? Absolutely.
Take me back. Yeah. It's probably like, 200 wholesale or something now, right? Those wines just sit on lists around 400, 500.
Yeah, I think it's less and it's just a massive markup.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Because it's so rare now.
Also the rarefication of the wines is also a big game changer, right? And that's what you see when you buy things like gray market. Like when I was buying, there's a couple distributors that I just wasn't working with for no particular reason, but just I didn't have a rep. It was post-pandemic, things were weird, and I'd be able to buy something from Atherton, and I'm just buying it, and I'm like, I know that I'm paying more than I should be paying, but I also know that I can just buy as much as I want. Buy 2 bottles and that's it. That's all I need.
Yeah. It's a nice placeholder on the wine list.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You go too deep on everything. Like you're not carrying a ton of inventory, but you have a great spread. It makes the list look good, but it makes your budget look better, Yeah.
Wine Searcher keeps me more honest, and I can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Yeah.
But for restaurants, it's great for them.
I mean, that used to be one of the things when I worked at Boulevard about Ulysse Colleen actually was, I was talking to John about some of the wines on his menu, and he was saying that he like wasn't getting the allocation for those wines anymore, and that he was just like buying them retail and putting them on the list because he's and just taking a lower margin because it's just like I just really love the wine and I really want to have it on the program and I don't want to have to jump through all the hoops to get it, so I just go buy a couple bottles and throw it on the list. And I'm like, gotta do what you gotta do sometimes.
Yeah. No, and there's also this weird thing like, sometimes we'll bring wine in from France or from Italy, and if it's a allocated wine, we take our allocation. But the stuff that we bring in ourselves, we can put online, whereas the stuff that comes through the proper channel, we can't put online.
Yeah. That's a good point. And that's also something that, we see a lot. I think it's mostly a California thing, right? It's the gray marketing.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. It happens in New York as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was talking to somebody about it, and they were saying, a unnamed retailer in the East Bay was buying, pallets of a wine from France because they were able to get it for like $5 or $10 less a bottle.
Yeah.
But when you add that up over several pallets, you're like, oh, they're saving a shitload of money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's at the end of the day, the business has to do what the business has to do to survive, which, and it's up to them. Kind of like you were saying about the wineries. It's kind of like you have to do what you have to do, and you're going to do what you want to do, ideally.
Yeah. I mean, and the people who are making the wine, that's their passion. That's their life's work.
Yeah.
So if they decide that they want to limit it, whether it's a good decision for their business or not, that's ultimately their decision. and then it's up to the consumer to decide whether they think that the wine's worth chasing and fighting over and spending their free time
and significant
Yeah.
copious
And-
amounts
yeah.
of money. Yeah.
free time and disposable income to try and acquire.
Well, that must be nice.
Yeah.
What's a producer that you've had recently that you're like really excited about? Is there anybody that's been like really kind of getting you fired up lately?
There isn't like not a single producer, I don't think. I think I'm kind of in an arc in my wine drinking where I don't necessarily get super, super stoked about a single producer because bottle variation, vintage variation,
Sure.
and blah, blah, blah. And I can be a little old and curmudgeon-y sometimes. But, I mean, I love drinking through the Jura. I love digging into Chenin Blanc in the Loire. And trying to find value in kind of in those places.
Yeah. Where there's still value to be had in storied regions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and value is such like a weird word because value has to do with ultimately what's in your bank account, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
You can, $1,000 bottle can be a great value for someone who can afford to drink $1,000 bottle. And a $10 bottle can be a stretch for people.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I always love to come in and peruse your guys' section. What's the section in the middle? It's like wines under $20 or something like that. I always love to come in and peruse that. And I'm always like, I mean, we have so much wine here that I'm always like, I want to get something. And then I'm like, I better not. But then, we have, I represent, a Beaujolais house, and Thanksgiving was coming up, and I was like, it's faux pas to just drink my own Beaujolais. I drink, enough of those bottles anyways, but I wanted to get something else. And again, I think the Bonnet Coton was like $30 or something like that. And I'm like, this is great. And it's cool to try something new. And
it's important.
It's important.
It's important to understand what's out there.
And also as a distributor, it's really easy to get seller's palate. And you only drink your wines because either you don't want to spend money on other wine, you don't need to spend money on other wine, or, you're drinking the Kool-Aid and you're just going like, our shit's the best shit, and it's like, I mean, it is if it is, but if it's the best shit because it's the only stuff that you're drinking, then it's kind of like.
Yeah. No, I mean, and when people from your side come in and try and sell me, it's very helpful if they have kind of a broader knowledge to say, listen, this is where this slots in. It's not the best wine from Beaujolais. But for the price, it fits here. Yeah. Instead of being like, no, this is a benchmark producer. It's absolutely amazing.
You have to have it.
This is what my sales manager has told me to say.
Right, yeah. This is the script I studied before I got out of my car. Yeah.
It's, I think having a global view of what's happening within, each region with your wines is important.
Super important. Let's see, what else? This wine's super good. Thank you for sharing it. It's really, really fucking cool. And again, like I said, I don't drink enough wines from these regions, and I don't really know like where to begin. But it's nice to know that there's a great neighborhood wine shop. It's called Flatiron, and I can pop in. And there's there's a smattering of producers from these regions that I can find.
If you need Grenier,
experimenting a little bit more. Well, yeah. What do you think about the red? Did you try the red?
I tried it. Yeah.
It's probably not as show stopping as this white that you brought, but I wanted to just think a little off the cuff.
I mean, I don't know what it is, but it has kind of New World Pinot Noir vibes with some age to it. Is kind of my guess. That is what it is. Yeah. I was thinking about what to open for you, and we didn't have a chance to run to the bunker, but I wanted to open something that I thought was cool, and also I was just thinking about like kind of our nice.
Our first getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And one of the first one of the things that I guess is important that I want to highlight, which we can go into after this, is one of the first events that I did with you guys was Oregon wines. And so I wanted to open something from Oregon. I wanted to open something with a little bit of age. And then also when I went to Riesling Boot Camp last year, we went to the J. Christopher Winery.
Oh, nice.
And I mostly only got to go because of your guys' incredible support of Riesling. But Ernie also owns an Oregon winery and is a huge Burgundy nerd. A massive collector. And so one of the wines that he owns, one of the wineries he owns is J. Christopher. And then he sources a bunch of cool, like, single vineyard Pinots and stuff from all around there. But the thing that I wanted to highlight about Flatiron was that you guys do these. I guess this can kind of parallel into two things, but the first is you do these really great kind of tasting events that are open to the public. You always charge $15 or whatever.
Yeah.
How long have you always done this?
Yeah, both stores.
Yeah.
New York and San Francisco. I think it kind of, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, the Flatiron Tasting Group, which we have nothing to do with other than we lend the space, and
Sure.
it's a lot of sommeliers around the city that come and taste and blind and blah, blah, blah. But I think conversation and being able to drink and hang out with other people and meet other people is incredibly important. You know, we're selling wine, which in itself is a beverage and also an experience, and a way to kind of bring people closer together. And I think having these tastings, we started doing them very, very cheap and realized that we needed to at least weed out some people.
Sure.
And we kind of settled in on just having it be an incredibly accessible price point, so that people can come and taste that $100 bottle and kind of have that experience to talk about with their friends, or come in with their friends and talk to the winemaker and kind of make wine, which can be daunting at times, just a more accessible thing, and just turn it into a beverage.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. I mean, that's one of the things I remember when I would work a couple of these events, or I would set up, tastings with the winemakers or the owners or whatever. They'd come down and I'd be like, these are some really sick wines for $15 that they get to try. It's kind of cool. While it's, we were talking about crowdsourcing earlier. It's kind of a way to like crowdsource tasting wine in a way. It's obviously probably not. I guess it kind of pays for itself a little bit, but maybe when you do one with Eschazow, I'll come to know.
Yeah.
I guess that the parallel that I had was I was going to talk about the tasting group too, because you guys have several tasting groups a week, right?
No, it's just one every Friday.
Oh, every Friday. Okay. Yeah. For some reason, I thought that you guys had a couple going on. The Friday one is like the group.
Yeah.
That's the one that like I said, when I first started at Quince, that was the one that everybody was like, that's the tasting group to go to. That's the one to get in. If you can get into that tasting group, you made it.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah, you guys have always been, since my time in San Francisco, again, having not been in the shop until 3 years ago, since my time in San Francisco, you guys have always been what I've thought of as like a benchmark shop, even
awesome.
even
Thank
before
you.
I went there.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I mean, it's incredibly flattering that that we can give these amazing sommeliers a space to hone their craft, and that they get to have that experience, and when I'll meet people and they'll be like, oh yeah, I met you like 6 years ago. I used to come in every Friday and see you in the mornings for that tasting group. And I'll be like, oh my God, yeah, it's so good to see you.
That's so cool. I mean, like you said, it's all about like relationships and kind of like building that personality out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And and I love going to restaurants and seeing amazing wine lists and talking to the sommeliers. And I think it's fun to have them come to our place and like see our store and kind of get an understanding of what we do too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what else?
I don't know. Tell me your thoughts about this wine.
I think it's super cool. I mean, I think that,
You said you've never had Grenier before.
never had Grenier before, and not that I know of. Maybe if it was, blended into something else, maybe. But, for one of the things that, we've talked about when we circle this wine is just kind of like, this is a huge blind spot for me, this region. And
I mean, it's a tiny blind spot.
Well,
it's a small region.
Sure, but still, I think it's important, and it's gaining an importance, and it's certainly a important region for people that are like really into wine. It's just, again, something that, like, having worked in sales in Texas with glaziers and then Southern Glazers, and having worked at Chambers now, I've been exposed to a lot of wines from a lot of different regions, and nobody I've ever worked for has ever had wines like this. Yeah. So it's new for me. And like I said, it's always challenging when I look at regions like this, because I go, I don't want to spend, $40 or $50 on a bottle of wine and not like it. Right. Yeah. So I think, though, that when I think about this, and I think about what is it? Domin Pelican.
Yeah.
And I think about like some of these like more well-known producers, or not more well-known, but like, let's say kind of like standard bearers, let's say. It's really, really awesome to see these wines and taste these wines, because it's just like, I don't have to know shit about this wine to know that it's a really good wine,
Yeah. No, I mean, and before we started, we were kind of talking about like the human aspect of wine. This is a wine made by Dominique Belluard, who tragically committed suicide in 2020 and didn't get to finish the wine. And Gannevaugh came in and ended up doing the assemblage and finishing the wine for the Belluard family. And it kind of makes you think, you have these wines that people hold to be so like precious, but ultimately it's about humanity and human connection. And, the fact that this super famous winemaker came in and helped his friends, family, during an incredibly tragic time. There's so much beauty, not only in the glass, but in the aura that surrounds it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the wine could suck, and the story would still sell it, right? Like, it's beautiful. It's that human connection, I think.
I think at this point there's no more wine to sell, but of this
sure.
wine. But yeah.
Sure. But I mean, structurally the wine is really fun. It's really a trip, right? Because like it still has kind of a little bit of yellow flower on the nose, and has kind of this fun, like briny, kind of like finger limey character on the palate that's really fun, and it feels
little reduction.
Yeah. But it's still like really, really cool. I mean, what is a wine like? How long does a wine like this could it potentially age? I mean,
decade.
Oh fuck,
decade plus.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's cool. I mean, again, it's just the whole region is such a blind spot for me.
I think I have 5 more bottles of it, and I plan on seeing how long it'll age.
Yeah. This feels like it's got plenty of time.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's just kind of one of those. It's one of those humbling wines, not only because of the story, but because it's just really fucking good.
Yeah. It is. It certainly is.
And it wasn't crazy expensive on release. I think it was like $40.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I mean, I worked this event a while back at the Ferry Building, and Ruth brought this, Ruth from Delita, I'm forgetting your last name for some reason, but she brought this bottle of Bourgogne Blanc that was made for Becky Wasserman. It was like made in honor of Becky Wasserman. Yeah. And she was like, it didn't really cost anything, but it was just like cool. And it was also the fact that like it was kind of a celebratory bottle, right? Like,
man, I know that wine. It's an Aligote.
It's an Aligote.
It was an Aligote Pour Becky from.
I have a picture. I can find it.
I'm completely blanking.
No, that's okay. I mean,
but yeah, it was.
There wasn't much of it, right?
No, there wasn't much of it. It was one of her longtime producers.
Yeah.
And Becky had this special relationship with her producers. They like absolutely loved her because she was a great person, and she did really good work for the region.
She helped expose so many so many amazing producers to the public.
red wine from the Côte de Beaune.
Yeah.
Volnay has a lot to thank Becky Wasserman for.
Yeah. It's cool though. I mean, Bianca and I talk about this a lot too. Is just like, it's great to see like the people that we're in the industry with now. And, you know, I've only been in the sales side of things for 3 years, which has greatly increased my network. You know, it's really awesome to see all the amazing people that are in the industry in San Francisco now and get to see like where they've been, where they're going, and kind of realize that like, wow, in 10 years and 15 years, like things are going to be different, but like these relationships are still going to be here.
Yeah.
And I think it's so fun. I mean, you know, again, you're one of the first people that I met at Chambers. Well, when I started at Chambers, and I still come see you once a week. And we shoot the shit, and mostly it's commiserating, you know. But there's giggles here and there, which is fun. It keeps us alive. So, anything else you want to share with any listeners? Any advice? Any words of wisdom?
I don't know. I guess the only advice that I have is my dad, who's getting up there in age. He always says, you know, he doesn't want to open this bottle because the person that he's drinking it with isn't going to appreciate it. And my response is always drink the bottle that you want to drink. And if they don't like the better bottle, then they're not going to hate it.
Yeah.
So find those bottles that you like, that you connect with, and it doesn't matter the price. It doesn't matter the region, whatever it is that connects with you. Just find it, drink it, and share it.
Go for it. Yeah. I think that's beautiful. I mean, you know, somebody once, I was at this event and these Italians were around and they were talking about their cellar, and the guy goes, "My cellar's right here." Yeah. My cellar's right here. I have some wine but I drank it. I drank it with my friends, and it was like the importance of sharing those experiences versus like, you know, a piece of glass sitting in a closet somewhere, right? So
I think when I was younger, and someone said that they were going to open up this crazy bottle of wine, whether I liked the person or not, I was going to show up.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm like, I'd rather drink a lesser bottle with someone that I want to share it with.
Right. Yeah.
And have that human connection as opposed to drinking Latoche with someone that I'm like, oh my God, are they ever going to shut up? I don't care about your Ferrari or so whatever. Yeah. They're going on and on about it. Instead, I'd rather drink Bourgogne Rouge with someone that I want to be hanging out with.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I mean, I've always said, you know, people go, well, if you like walked into somebody's house and they poured you a glass of wine and it was like this wine, like, what'd you do? I'm like, I'll drink it. Yeah. Like, whatever. I'm in their house. Like, they poured me a glass. You know how lucky I am to have them pour me a glass of wine? You know how lucky I am to be sitting across the table from them? Like, they chose to give me time out of their life. And just like the reason I feel so appreciative about this podcast, and I feel so appreciative of all the guests that have come on, including you, is that like, this is time out of your day. This is time out of your schedule. It's time away from your family. It's your free time, and you're choosing to spend it with me. And that's, I mean, even if the podcast never becomes a massive thing, like, it's still amazing to think that we've documented this great human experience and this great human interaction that's, you know, usually more easily facilitated with that. So.
Yeah. No, it's a cool time that these things can happen.
Yeah.
And it's fun to drink cool things with cool people.
Yeah, certainly.
Ultimately.
All right. Well, let's wrap it.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.